I am writing a tremendous amount of documentation, call it a master prompt, which is then going to be put into a vibe coding tool. Those master prompts require an intense amount of knowledge and understanding of the business problem or opportunity. The quality of the result that you get back from your vibe coding tool will reflect the fact that you didn't do a good job describing it. I recently vibe coded a UX. I've got 95 pages of documentation that basically describe to a vibe coding tool how I want these requirements and the experience to be manifested in a visual. But what it means now is I can take 95 pages of documents, functional requirements, non-functional, the prompts or whatever, along with sort of the moving pictures. Now I can give them to engineers, architects, and developers, and they can read the words, but then they're like, oh, this is what it should look like. These are the buttons. This is the way you move through the problem space. That is shaving countless hours and multiple iterations out of the SDLC cycle because you got the visual.
Welcome to Software Leaders Uncensored, where tech leaders drop the filters and just tell it like it is. I'm your host, Steve Taplin, serial technology entrepreneur, published author of the book Fail Hard, Win Big, and CEO of Sonatafy Technology, a firm that delivers software outcomes through US-led execution along with LATAM software engineering. Today, I am joined by Brian Bauer, multi-time CTO, over 20 years of transformative tech experience, AI expert, and now VP of AI products at Rational Exponent. Brian, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Steve. I'm super happy to be here. I love talking about technology and, I like talking about AI even more. So we should have a pretty good conversation going here.
Good deal. Well, so you've been with Rational Exponent for a little over 2 years. Tell us about the company, how you got the role, and what you're doing.
So, we started Rational Exponent about 2 years ago. So I was here from day one, right? I'm employee number one at the company. The three guys that, I started the company with, we've all worked together multiple times over the last decade. So it was a little bit like getting the band back together. At a previous company, we were all together. We exited by selling that to a large GSI, and then we did our own thing, for a couple of years. And we said, you know what, this whole movement around AI, it's the biggest thing that we've probably experienced in our lifetime, around technology, bigger than the internet 25 years ago, bigger than cloud over the last 10 years. So we said, you know what, we've got to get, the group back together. We've got to find a meaningful space where we can, innovate, bring new technology to market, help out, customers, and ultimately, be super successful.
Awesome. So does your company have a niche in the banking industry?
Yeah. So good question. When technology companies start, they can start in any number of ways. You can find, some fantastic little companies or large companies coming out of Silicon Valley, where you get pure technologists who have found kind of a gizmo or a widget. And they're like, hey, you know what? This technology is cool. Let's go find a place to use it, right? Perfectly valid. We see that model all the time. We started in exactly the opposite way. So personally, I've got 30 years of capital markets and investment banking experience. My partners, the co-founders of this company have similar backgrounds. Basically, we're bankers, but we've also worked in technology for many years. So that's kind of a powerful combination because we understand the business of banking, whether it's retail banking or commercial banking, capital markets, investment banking. So we understand how banks operate as banks. We understand the challenges. We understand the opportunities. So when we started Rational Exponent and we were thinking, okay, how do we use an AI as a solution, to help move the needle, either solve pain points or capture opportunities in our, domain of expertise, which happened to be banking. It wasn't just, hey, let's create some AI and then try to go find a problem to solve. It was the other way around. We said, hey, we understand banking. We know what first line does in terms of revenue generation. We understand what second line does in terms of risk management. We understand third line audit. We understand regulators. We understand how regulators put, banks under the microscope. And we understand deregulation, right, which is something that's happening now. We also understand regulation. So we're going to build technology that helps people like us, like bankers, solve problems and capture opportunities in their home space, right? So we don't have to go looking for a problem, to solve with technology. We already know what those problems are. We know what the opportunities are. We just needed the technology, to help us.
I don't know if it's confidential. Can you talk about any of the AI products you brought to market and the challenges they've solved?
Absolutely. Our flagship product is called Reagent, RE:agent. So it takes a minute to type it, but it's Reagent. We've got a website, it's out there. So that's our flagship product. And, depending on who, we're talking to, I was just talking to, one of the largest credit card issuers, in the world, about sort of their needs and their opportunities. Yesterday, I was talking to a $50 billion bank, right? Two very, one smaller organization, very large organization, but they share common challenges, believe it or not. So with this Reagent product, one of the things that we tackle is we help what's called second line of defense, which is the risk management organization within a bank, deal with some of the challenges that they have. And an example, of one of those and where our product helps, your typical bank, is going to be overseen by the OCC, right? That's this regulatory body, and they publish thousands and thousands of regulations, right? And they appear in these things called handbooks, and they change. So not only do you have to read these encyclopedias, but periodically they change. So if you're in the risk organization in a bank, your sort of mission and responsibility is to create bank policies, including standards, and procedures that are in alignment with all of these federal regulations. Now, traditionally, what's happened is that, if you're a top 10 bank in the United States, you probably employ the better part of 10,000 people whose job it is to read regulations and then read bank policies to determine, is this policy covering off a regulation? Now, multiply that by thousands, right? And you get a lot of people. But if you ask some of these folks, like, what is the worst part of their job, the part that they wish would go away? They really don't enjoy reading regulations and then having to go on a treasure hunt. Once you've read the regulations, then you have to have some amount of like tribal knowledge to understand where's the policy that is supposed to align to the regulation. And maybe you find it and you're like, okay, this policy matches this regulation. We're doing a pretty good job there with adequacy. Well, then somebody changes a regulation and you have to reread all the regulations over again. And then you have to go and find all the impacted policies. We came along, with a technology that said, we got you. We're going to read all those regulations for you. And we're going to do the hard part of interpreting regulations, because regulations are written by bureaucrats, in kind of weird government language. And it's hard for people to understand. So you have to interpret that. And we do that using AI, and it's heavily tested using evals in our lab to ensure we're getting correct interpretations. But then what we can do is to say, hey, if you give me your library of policies, I am going to determine which policies map to which regulations. And then, using basically requirements gathering and, understanding what we call adherence, I can tell you, and this is all programmatic using AI, I can tell you, does this policy adhere to all of the requirements of this regulation? And if not, I'm going to tell you exactly why not. But I'm not just going to tell you there's a problem. I'm going to help you solve it. I'm going to find the spot in your document that's incorrect or insufficient. I'm going to give you the new language that will then make it sufficient and then allow you to accept, edit, or so forth, that change. Now, when you think about everything I just described in terms of like manual labor, it's days and months.
Yeah, at least.
We do it in seconds and minutes.
The way you've described that's sounds like a perfect use case where the right AI agent can take it from weeks and months to, seconds, minutes, and hours.
We're fortunate because, one, not only are we improving the quality of what we'll call the compliance product, these document artifacts that are being produced, the quality is going up. But when you ask, our user base how they feel about the product, they say things like, you made the worst part of my job go away. You're freeing up my time so I can focus on the elevated tasks that are more important, right? Or the things that maybe they wouldn't have had time to deal with in the past. So like if you're a bank and you're trying to grow, especially right now in this moment of, deregulation, and you're trying to bring new products to market, or maybe you get engaged in M&A, you don't want all of your risk and compliance folks tied up in just keeping the status quo in a good condition. You want them to have time to help you grow and to help you transform the business. So we're elevating these folks. Some of our customers use the word amplify. They say, hey, you know what? You're amplifying the resources that we've got, taking away some of the, sort of the most mundane, sort of manually intensive labor, freeing up my folks to really add value to the organization. So it's very exciting stuff for us.
I love it. Well, tell us about your software product and engineering teams and how many people you have, where they're located, the work model you guys do.
So right now, we've got the flagship product. It's organized into various categories depending on what part of the bank, or when I say bank, it's really any regulated entity, which is really cool because the sort of what I call the central intelligence or the brain, of our software is perfectly suited to financial services because they're heavily regulated. But if you think too, hey, who else is heavily regulated? You end up thinking
Last time
about
I checked, healthcare and life sciences would fall in that category.
exactly, and things like local government, right?
Right.
They're all heavily regulated. So if you think about it, if we build this agnostic brain the way we did, I'm going to bring in regulations, healthcare, government, financial services, etc. And then I'm going to help you draft the documents that you need, whether it's, healthcare, government, financial services. So, and the reason I'm mentioning this now, it comes into the engineering and sort of the ethos that we have, where we want context and domain agnostic, centralized intelligence for the very purpose that I just said. So, hey, this is good for a bank, but it's also fantastic, say, for, a local government. And it's the same kind of technology. And so, when we build our engineering teams, what we're looking for, are really sort of the best and the brightest, the folks who've got, tenured experience with AI. And I'm talking pre, chat GPT folks who've probably been in deep learning and machine learning, for a decade, but now have built on that foundation of knowledge and, parlayed that into the generative space, which is what most people think of now, with the chat GPTs and so forth. And so myself as the head of product, my job, if you will, is to understand our market, needs and opportunities, from financial services or government. And I'm the guy who's going to figure out, hey, how can we solve that problem? How can we help a customer capture that opportunity? And then I describe that in terms of a product brief, right? The product
So
briefs are then,
take a step back. How many engineers do you guys currently have at the company?
we are, somewhere around 30, or so, which
And
is,
are you guys a fully remote company?
yeah, we are like distributed not only across the United States, but distributed around the world. We've got folks in South and Latin America. We've got folks in Europe. So what's really interesting is some people kind of look at that and go, "Oh, wouldn't it be great to be all together?" But we end up more with a follow the sun model. So I know, hey, I've got guys working on these problems could be as much as 20 hours a day. So it actually works out really well.
How does your product teams integrate and work with your engineering teams, which is usually friction at a lot of companies?
We've actually got some folks who are the intermediaries, which has been one of the best things for me because I can describe, I know an awful lot about technology because I've been in it for a long time. I know even more about business. But what I prefer to be able to do is describe, the product requirements in business terms. But then I'm going to hand off to product guys, who work next to me, who also are very much in line with the engineers and the architects of the system. So I can express a solution in business terms, but then it's going to be translated by, the first line of product into what I'll just call developer spec terms. Which
Okay.
literally means taking my functional and non-functional requirements, chunking them up, writing the JIRA tickets, filing the personas, that we all know the way these things are written. Hey, I am a user. I want to do this today. And I don't enjoy, that level of detail, even though it's baked into my vision. But fortunately, and to your point, we eliminate a lot of the friction with engineering and architecture by having this group in the middle who helps me translate.
And are they working side by side throughout the process with the engineering team? Is it only at the beginning? I mean, how have you guys taken that friction of truly having product and engineering aligned?
I'm not sure it works perfectly everywhere, but one of the things, as a startup, especially, we're 2 years old now, but, I'm still a startup working in, one of the fastest moving industries out there. We have to find, and spot and reconcile friction and dysfunction as immediately as possible. We don't have the luxury of, oh, it'll sort itself out. Let's have an offsite 6 months from now and we can discuss it. No, it has to happen right now. And part of that requires being very open, very honest. And that doesn't suit everybody all the time, because sometimes honesty is a little bit, it can be a little bit harsh. It can be a little bit, sort of like, why are you telling me this in this way? Because I don't have 3 hours to explain it to you. Let's just cover this off in 10 minutes. Here's the problem. We need to fix it. And that sort of, collaboration and communication never stops. And it takes all kinds of forms. It's a lot of time spent, on video calls, but it's also, and this is maybe, what you'll find interesting is that we will get together, pods, of folks into a single physical location as often as possible. So we could have developers, engineers, and architects meeting together as frequently, as once a month, which maybe doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're bringing in folks, say from Europe, South America, and across the United States, and you're bringing them all to Pittsburgh for a couple of days, once a month is actually, a pretty good cadence.
No doubt. And, remote work is phenomenal. My company is fully remote. We have over 100 engineers. I don't care what tools are out there. Nothing beats getting people in a room together. Whiteboarding, building a rapport three-dimensionally in person as opposed to at a screen.
Especially, when you've got disagreements, or misunderstandings, and that's what you want to avoid. And I think, to your point, it doesn't matter sometimes how carefully you craft a message. Whether it's a Teams message or a document, it's still words on a page. Someone's going to read that and interpret that. And depending on, I don't know, how they're feeling that day, whether it's about you or just a situation, or maybe something in their personal life, they could read something into what you've written that shouldn't be there. Like, why is Brian saying this to me in this way? Well, he isn't. I've just written a line of text. You've interpreted it, and then you've decided to feel a certain way about it. So it really is important to get people together as often as possible.
So Brian, you said that your team is vibe coding UXs and getting prototypes out quick. What tools are you using? What do you guys like?
An article that came out of Andreessen Horowitz recently from their, A16Z website. And it was talking about the palantirization of everything. The fact that it was Palantir doesn't really matter. What the article was focused on was this concept of what they call forward deployed engineers. And the idea is, taking engineers, folks who are deeply technical, and pushing them farther or closer to the business. And I had kind of a violent reaction to that concept. And I have every time I hear the idea of an FDE. Because to me, being, first a business guy and secondly, a technologist, I need people in the front office, with the business users who understand the business. And I'm not sure that I would, love the model of a technologist who's trying to learn the business. And so, but what tools have allowed us to sort of change that model? And I would almost say, it's business guys who are now enabled with new forms of technology. And that's where something like vibe coding comes in. And, I'm not going to say that, when we build our core product, its origins are vibe coding, because that's not quite right. But what it allows me to do, right, as the guy who's head of product, when I envision a technical solution that requires a UI or a UX that is in the future going to be deployed, to business users, in the old days, well, until very recently, the way the model worked is I would write many, many pages of functional and non-functional requirements that describe this concept that I have, for a piece of software. And then that would go over the fence and it would go into, engineering and architecture. And it seems more often than not, what I would get back is a UI or a UX, which was somebody's best interpretation of all that documentation, but it simply isn't correct. It's missing the nuances. It doesn't have, a deep understanding of the business users and what they care about and their attention spans and things. So you went through many iterations.
We all get it. What tools do you like out there that help you and your product team bring prototypes to life to see if it's got any legs before it goes to engineering?
So what I can do now, I can take, a vibe coding product that's just really good in the UI UX space. And let's pick on Lovable for a minute, right? Because they're one of the first movers and people know that name. I can begin describing a UI UX concept, to Lovable, and I can immediately get a rendering. And if I don't like the rendering or I want to make modifications to it, I can do that. And so now what happens, and by the way, I want to say, sometimes people look at vibe coding, particularly like for UI UX, and they kind of turn down their nose to it because they think, oh, you gave it a prompt and it came back with something and it's magic. That's not actually how this stuff works. I find that I am writing a tremendous amount of documentation, call it a master prompt, if you will, which is then going to be, put into, a vibe coding tool. Those master prompts require, an intense amount of knowledge and understanding of the business problem or opportunity. And then I need to be describing the way in which I want the UX to function. And if you shortchange this information, the quality of the result that you get back from your vibe coding tool will reflect the fact that you didn't do a good job describing it. So I recently vibe coded, if you will, a UX. I've got 95 pages of documentation that basically describe to a vibe coding tool how I want these requirements and the experience to be manifested in a visual. But what it means now is I can take 95 pages of documents, functional requirements, non-functional, the prompts or whatever, along with sort of the moving pictures, right? Which are, the prototypes in Lovable. And now I can give them to engineers, architects and developers, and they can read the words, but then they're like, oh, this is what it should look like. These are the buttons. This is the way you move through the problem space. And in my experience, and I've been doing this for decades, that is shaving countless hours and multiple iterations, out of the SDLC cycle because you got the visual.
You used to spend months and months putting prototypes and MVPs together to see if it's got any legs, and tools like Lovable and others can help you bring something to life quickly, test it out from a business perspective, and use that to hand over to the tech teams. And I agree, that shaves a lot of time off the process and makes things more efficient.
You're absolutely right about the market validation. Once I've got, a mock-up, I can begin showing that to, very select customers to say, hey, how do you feel about this? And you get the feedback. They're like, oh, maybe it would be this other way, and we kind of do it a little bit differently here. Can you change that? And the answer is, yeah, of course I can change that. And you can rapidly iterate, but this time you're iterating with the customer in a way that's easy for them to consume and to understand. I would rather spend time talking to my customers, about what I want to deliver to them, and then make the next step of the engagement with developers, engineers, and architects far more efficient and productive. So yeah, am I a big fan of vibe coding? Absolutely. Right. Is it going to build an entire enterprise application for you? I don't think so. And that's not the way we use it. But for rapid prototyping of visuals, I think it's fantastic.
No doubt. Brian, what are some common mistakes you see other organizations make that you avoid?
That's a huge topic. If I want to narrow it down a little bit, I think, there are any number of startups, that have popped up around sort of this AI, boom that's happening now. And I don't mean boom like bubble. I mean, basically, there's an inflection point that we see right now that is changing the world forever, because AI is going to be ubiquitous as fast as people like myself can create the tooling. I think, one of the mistakes that people make is that you could be a pure technologist, and this is what you'll get in a lot of, pure plays coming out of, say, a Silicon Valley. You get super smart people, engineers, potentially architects, and they think that they've come up with a fantastic idea, a solution, a gadget, was kind of a whiz bang kind of thing, but they don't know who would want it and what to do with it. In many cases, these things, which are kind of like, it's the difference between maybe an invention and an innovation. Anything could be an invention. Like if you thought of it, okay, I can patent that, I'll call it an invention. Is it an innovation? Meaning, was it applicable? Was it viable? Did it actually meet a need? Did it solve a problem? Does it have ROI? Is there a business case? And so I personally don't like the idea of creating a piece of technology first and then wondering what to do with it. I like to understand who's going to buy it? Why are they going to buy it? How is it going to change their life? Then I will craft the technology to fit. So I think a lot of people get it backwards, to answer your question.
Great point. Brian, thank you for getting uncensored with us today. It's great to mix up. A lot of times we have engineering leaders, CTOs. It's nice to have product leaders get the viewpoint out of the marketplace. Love what you guys are doing. Before we wrap, what's your advice for tech leaders today who are trying to build, scale, or even just survive in these crazy times?
I would say, given that my company and myself personally, we're really laser focused on AI-enabled technologies, some of the times I talk to customers and they will tell me, oh, we've developed 1,000 use cases for how we want to use AI. And those are real numbers. They're like, oh, we asked everybody, what are you going to do with AI? And there's 1,000 things. In my experience, quite often, I'll say maybe 900 of those 1,000 ideas don't actually need AI in the first place. And then maybe another 50 of the remaining 100 are just non-starters because they don't move the needle in terms of business case or ROI. And then, of the 50 you have left, quite often you can categorize them into three kind of like core foundational capabilities. Now, when you look at that, you could say, I built one capability and I covered off 25 use cases and I did it in a universal agnostic way. So my advice, but again, particularly with this keen interest in, AI right now, and I'll reference this MIT article that says something like, well, 97% of, AI projects fail to show any revenue or any ROI and they're abandoned because of what I just said. 900 of them weren't good examples in the first place, and then three capabilities could probably cover off, an additional 100. So look at your use case backlog very carefully and use common sense. Not everything needs an AI solution. And sometimes when you find these collections or categories, you can build one thing really well and then use it in multiple places.
I like it. Great advice. Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Steve.
That's it for this episode of Software Leaders Uncensored. I'm Steve Taplin. If you enjoyed the show, go ahead and hit subscribe. Remember to fail hard, win big, and always build what matters. See you next time. That's a wrap. Another great episode of Software Leaders Uncensored. Thank you guys so much for listening. I really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun doing this show. I love talking with great tech leaders. As a side note, if you're interested, check out my new book, Fail Hard, Win Big. This is the story of how I built 30 companies, failed on 20, and turned 10 into multi-million-dollar wins. The common thread with all of them was custom software. Also, if you need software development help out there, my company, Sonatafy Technology, we deliver world-class software development engineers out of Latin America. We have a solid track record of helping companies launch better products and faster. Thanks again for listening. Appreciate it and appreciate you.